All right, welcome back. So let's get started on our coiling project. I'm going to hit these with some water because I've been sitting here for a minute and grab my base from where I've left it. And just so you don't forget, this is the shape I'm going for. I like to have that nearby so I have a good idea of what I'm shooting for, just generally. So what I'm pulling out of this bucket is a needle tool. I didn't show you this in the last video, and that's because I didn't think about it because, you know, sometimes things slip your mind. I'm going to use this to create some deeper slip scores for my slip to sort of adhere to, and I'm only going to hit the edge of my base. I don't need to hit the inside of the base because there's not going to be anything connected there. We're only going to do the edge because we're making a pot, we're making a vase. So I'm going to pick out the fattest of the coils. I'm going to look at this one, say, nope, not that one, that's the one I want. So just give it another consistent roll, and I'm going to slide my finger and thumb just all the way across it, and that's going to create like a flat surface on one end for me to hit with my serrated rib. And I'm going to go down completely on one side, and then I'm going to sort of swipe at it in the other opposite direction. And then we're going to pinch it to the base of our pot. Now, when you go to connect one coil to the other side of another, or when we start a fresh coil, always hit that edge with your knife, and let's cut it at a 45-degree angle. So that way, when we go to do that next layer, it's going to create a nice smooth transition versus like an abrupt stop. And when we do it this way, what's going to happen is you're going to have an easier time smoothing it and filling in those gaps, which will be much more difficult if we were to just go from one end to one end. So I'm taking my wooden knife here, and I'm going to compress the bottom and connect the base of the coil, the bottom coil, to the bottom of the base. And that's just going to make sure I've got a smooth adherence to that. And I'm going to basically just run it up the sides all the way around, because as nice as those coils look, it's not the aesthetic I'm going for. I need a smooth surface. And right now I'm just doing it kind of loosely. I need to make sure my coil adheres to my other coil. Now the shape I'm going for is narrow at the bottom and goes out at the top. So that's sort of what I'm gonna aim for. And to do that, we need to make sure when we do the next coil, it's just angled out ever so slightly. And the opposite is true when I'm trying to go back in. So if I were to try to make it narrower, I would put it on the inside of the previous coil. And right now I'm trying to make it go out. I'm trying to make it belly out and be a little bit more voluptuous. So I'm gonna put it on the edge of the coil, and you'll see that more in depth when I go to pinch that coil in. I'm sort of pushing it out a little bit with my thumb and my forefinger. Once again, when you go to connect that coil, you want to hit it at a 45-degree angle. Score it a little bit, hit it with some slip, because we're trying to make sure things stay together. Now, it's not exactly perfect, and you can kind of see that I sort of address where it's sitting a little funny on the side, but I'm making sure to go in after I add my coil and sort of pinch it in the direction that I'd like it to go. But I'm not pinching it so roughly that my coil becomes too thin in that section. So when we go and make these small adjustments, it's not about full force, it's about intention. And I think that's what we need to sort of think about when working like this. We want to make sure that our actions are purposeful. So this is me demonstrating what that angle should look like. Because if we were to do it this way, once again, it'll be a smoother transition than if it were just like a right angle, for instance. Once again, hit it with that serrated rib. We're gonna leave it like a way for it to connect. And I like to use my serrated rib and hit the edges of the pot. Sometimes when you create a funny surface, it's really easy to get a nicer smooth pot, and smooth is what we're shooting for this particular go round. I'm leaving that last coil for the top because it's a little thinner than the rest of them, and you really want your heavy bases to be at the bottom, and that's just a gravity thing. If we were to put that thin coil at the bottom and then try to put a fat coil on the top, it would fall apart. So I'm choosing my coils based on, fattest ones first, thinnest ones next. And they're not all super thin, but some of them are structurally a little bit sturdier, in my opinion, than the others. Notice how my pot is starting to belly out a little bit, and that's because every time I put that new coil on, I put it just a little, like maybe like an eighth of an inch, or even maybe a 1/16 to the outside of the pot. So I just angle it ever so slightly, and that's gonna give it more of a form, more of a shape. And my general rule of thumb is for every 3 coils, go in and clean up the inside and clean up the outside. So for every 3 coils, scrape the side together. And you can do that with your fingers, or you can do that with a rib, whatever's most comfortable for you. But don't put too much pressure, otherwise you're gonna poke right through your pot. So it looks like I'm really getting in there and pinching it, but it's just ever so slight. Alright, so from here I'm going to start speeding it up, because it's not so much about taking your time and watching this. You can really get a feeling for it, because it's just going to be process. It's time. So repetition, slip and score, consistent coils. And I'm going to try to go up to about 5-6 inches with this, because I want this to be the bottom of my pot. And like I said, for about every 3 coils, it's always a good idea to sort of go in and clean it up. Now, I haven't really done a lot of scraping on the outside. I've done more on the inside. And I'll probably get more in depth on the outside once it's become more sturdy. Right now, if I were to push too much on the outside, I might end up losing the shape I'm going for. So if I spend too much time focusing on surface now, it's probably going to fall to pieces. So right now, at this point in time, at this juncture, we are shooting for shape. We are just shooting for it to be a solid pot. And we can even make it more dramatic, and we probably will make it more dramatic shaped once it's set up for a while, because it really just, my clay is soft enough to work with and coil with the way I want it to, but it's not hard enough for me to successfully shape it without falling to pieces. If I were to push on it too much, it would just crumble. So right now we are just building up the form, and that's sort of what I'm working with. And it took me about, I would say maybe 20 minutes total to do this, and this is just the bottom half of the pot. We're going to work this one in 2 pieces, and you're more than welcome to work it in one hole and take your time, which I do recommend. Or you can do like me, because I'm a little impatient, and I worked in 2 pieces. And you'll see part 2, which is going to be the top half, in the next video. Notice how I had to make a little adjustment and push it over, and that's just because I got a little crazy with the smoothing on the side, and it's, like I said, it's a little too soft at this point in time. So I had to push it back to where it needs to be. And we don't want to have to do that too much, because something they don't tell you about always is that clay has memory. Clay remembers the way you move it, and if you move it too much, it's gonna remember that action, and we're gonna regret it. We're gonna have a bad time later on. So for now, I'm just building up the form. And like I said with my hand motions, I want it to sort of I wanted it to go out, and now I want it to sort of bottleneck at the top, because I like that sort of feminine silhouette, you know. And notice how when I went to make that cut, it popped right off, and that's because I hadn't slipped and scored and pinched it down. I hadn't compressed it at all. So you have to slip and score, unfortunately. You can't just stack things on top of each other, because the clay knows when you haven't done the procedure right. Now, noticing when I pinch, I don't pinch on just one side, I'm pinching on both sides. A big part of working in clay successfully is making sure your pressure is even wherever you do. So like if I'm going to push and scrape the inside, I'm going to go ahead and put my hand on the outside. And that's so that way it's got this equal and opposite force. And this is like a strong rule for anything clay related. If I move in one direction, I need to make sure I've got a barrier in the other direction, because sometimes that could be the difference between a successful piece and a piece that falls to bits. But don't worry, if your pot is not like entirely successful the first time, the great thing about clay is that it is renewable in some sense. Like you can literally take your busted, scooshed pot and wedge it back together and start over. I had a teacher in my undergrad who would always, she was very chipper, she was very chirpy, and every time we would get upset because our pot would fall to pieces or collapse, she'd just go, make another. And I hear that in my head every time I go to make something. So if I see something not working out, I'm going to go ahead and just squish it. And I do recommend that's a good mindset to have, because if you see that the initial idea is not successful or it's not turning out the way you want it to be, this is clay. Clay can do what you want it to do. So just make sure you're happy with it at the end of the day.